When I first put on the Yonex Ad Accel, honestly, it felt different than every other shoe I have tested ever, including it was much different than all the other Yonex shoes I've tested. And then when I went to make my first hard push off in these shoes, that's when it kind of dawned on me what shoe these are the heir apparent to. And I think a lot of you might be very surprised, and more of you will probably be really excited because these things honestly remind me of a shoe that I think a lot of us were hoping would come back on the market. So let's see what they're all about. And thanks to Yonex for sending me a pair of these shoes. Check out. However, like always, this video is not sponsored. They're not seeing it before you, and all opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, starting off in the uppers, this is one thing that is very reminiscent of most of the Yonex shoes we're seeing recently. You do get an entire forefoot of TPU, and then the medial side of the shoe is completely covered in TPU. What I thought was really interesting, though, is when you go up into the midfoot on the lateral side, that's when you start to get into a textile weave. And then, the lace line is actually reinforced with just some backing, right? It does have a runners on it on both sides. But on the medial side, you get TPU backing on the lateral side. It's kind of like a TPU backing, but a little more of that kind of rubberized, more traditional backing on them. I did notice when I first put them on, the heel slippage was mild to more moderate, and then as soon as it broke in, which these TPU shoes, they take maybe about 45 minutes to an hour to break in. Once they broke in, the heel slippage went down to pretty much none. Now the interesting thing is on these, the tongue is double thickness when you get into the more proximal tongue, then it goes pretty much single thickness. You do get a little bit of padding here with the netting, but then once you get into the forefoot, you do have a lot of padding underneath of that TPU, which is nice because you see in some TPU shoes, especially in the basketball space, they are just killers on your toes, right on your toenails, right? They're just bloody toenail machines. Whereas in these ones, they feel as plush as any shoe underfoot. But what I thought was just the biggest miracle of these shoes was the breathability. Now you look at the breathability test on these, they only heated up 109.6 degrees, which is just crazy for a shoe that this much TPU on top of it. But if you look at the breathability mapping, that's what really told the tale. Because when I had the heat gun on them, I should say, I had my hand on there, you can probably see on the video, where it was coming out the lateral side of the forefoot like crazy. Like it was getting legitimately hot. Then I did the breathability mapping of them. You can see fog just pouring out of the front lateral side of the shoe. Now the tongue also has some pretty decent breathability. So for a TPU shoe, honestly, this is one of the better ones in terms of heat trapping. Now, of course, it's not going to be as good as a shoe that has just completely, open pores, right? Like really wide open TPU meshing and weaving, right? But for a shoe that has this much backing on it, this much protection in terms, of dragging your back foot or whatever, your lead foot, for what you get versus the heat and moisture egress capabilities, I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And of course, surprising no one on the upper durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, I mean, the burr basically just, cleans this TPU off. You do have exposed foam between the rubber and then, the upper. So, that might get a little weird. But getting into the midsole teardown, this has to be one of the craziest shoes I've ever torn down. Now, Yonex actually gave me one of the shanks when they sent me these shoes. So I can actually show you the actual shank in a second here. But when you look at this thing on the teardown, as you go in from the rear foot into the forefoot, you get a giant slab of power cushion, which is Yonex proprietary foam. I asked them directly what it was. I basically just got like a smile and a wink because they're not telling anybody it is proprietary. The carrier foam on this thing, though, it does not feel as dense as the Eclipsians, right? It feels a little bit more springy, a little bit more soft, a little bit more like, like a bounce house type feeling. You look at it on the microscope, it does have the appearance of EVA, right? Anytime you see those, those big pores in there, and it looks a little bit more flat, right? Not flat as in surface, but doesn't shine, right? Like a flat matte, right? Like a paint. That usually to me shows like an EVA or at least something that's blended with EVA. Whereas that power cushion you see on the microscope looks a little bit more shiny, a little bit more plasticky, little other elements in there. Usually that's some elements of eTPU, OCPs, PEBX, thermoplastics in there. Like I said, these foams are blends, right? But you can kind of see the difference between the two of them. But like I said, the most incredible part of this midsole is the shank. Now, this shank actually has two springboards to it. Now, number one, it's got springboards that go into the forefoot, or leaflets that go into the forefoot. But then it also has these little prongs in the midfoot. Now, this is what produced that really crazy sensation to me on foot when I first put them on. Because before I tore this down, I thought to myself, this is just going to have a cutout in the heel. It's going to be scooped out or something crazy. It's not. It's just a standard rear foot, right? It's got a giant slab power cushion. Forefoot's got the power cushion too. But those leaflets, right, those springboards, basically take all the tension off of your heel. So even though your heel is contacting the ground on them, it feels like it is up off the ground. It feels like you are kind of up on the ball of your foot or kind of like mid-foot on. So it's almost like it's like kind of getting you into a forward leaning stance, right? So it's kind of teaching you to be up on the balls of your foot like you should in tennis. Now, that does come with a little bit of a learning curve because at first, in my mind, I'm like, okay, am I going to roll this? Is my foot really contacting the ground? It is, and you know, spoiler alert, I never rolled, I never sprained. I really didn't feel unstable in these whatsoever. It's just kind of a mind freak type thing when you first have them on. Like I said, the tension is all the way off of your heel. Now look at this thing on the bounce height test, really shocking nobody, 32 centimeters in the rear foot, 29 in the forefoot, which I actually thought was odd because there's a thicker slab of power cushion in the rear foot. And usually power cushion is what completely deadens the ball bearing, whereas in the forefoot, it is a much wider power cushion, right? It's a whole slab. It's a strobel board of power cushion. That because there's a much larger surface area of it. I'm not sure, but kind of what we expected with Yonex and power cushion. That is a feature, not a bug in terms of Yonex, in terms of their thinking, whereas the shank on these is what's doing all the diving board effect. So they can afford to make the foam on these a little more shock absorbing. But getting into the outsole tread, to borrow a line from one of my favorite YouTubers, these were different, but kind of the same. Number one, you get a pretty flat herringbone on the medial side with these break points here where the shoe should bend, which I always really like. And then a really chunky herringbone here, or more of a chunky delta pattern, I should say, on the lateral side for a little more grip. Now, I look at the grip test ramp, like every other Yonex shoe slips at 37 degrees. And, you know, on foot, they still have the same amazing grip and amazing feel that all the other Yonex shoes do. One thing is, you look at these things, they pick up way more of the court than other Yonex shoes do, and they actually feel softer than some of the other Yonex shoes. Now, if you look at this thing on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, once again, the burr basically just scuffs it. But just the feeling of it, like I said, a little bit more of a softer rubber. And you can tell, right? It's picking up, you know, more of the court. And I play on pretty clean courts. To me, these aren't sliding first shoes because they do really want to grip. I know you can slide in them just because of the profile of it. And I've seen people slide in these, so obviously you can. It's just versus the Eclipsians, where it's just like you can slide, you can grip, you can really do whatever you want in them. They kind of have that real tweener profile. But to me, these are stopping power, pivot, and go type shoes first. And then once the break-in period, or if you're, you know, a better slider, you know, after a little bit of a break-in period, that's when these things start to get a little bit more buttery in terms of sliding. But speaking of pivoting power, you know, get up and go, if you look at these things on the speed ratio, I think this is another one of these shoes with the speed ratio. Doesn't, you know, you just can't take into account the insanity of this shank. These things come in at a 2.07 because of the power cushion, and then with a shank score of 0.3 because it is double thickness, does cross a zone in presence of a shank. These things come in at a 2.37. Honestly, these things are probably, in reality, one of the fastest shoes out there, just because of, number one, the position they put your foot in, or your body in, right? Like just primed and ready to go. Number two, just how streamlined they are. But number three, the action of that shank. Now, over time, you know, if you're a heavier player, does that start to, you know, kind of wane down, and maybe that speed ratio does start to kind of meet in the middle? Yeah, maybe. But in terms of initial speed on these things, they are rocket ships. But just a word on that pivoting power. If you look at the lateral flange on these, obviously it's not as aggressive as the Eclipsian line, you know, just going, you know, in the cardinal directions. That's where I think these do their best work, whereas like the Eclipsian is much more for those 45-degree angle type cuts. But getting into the fit of the Ad Accels, honestly, this was the most surprising part of them. Now, number one, the inflare is only 11 degrees, so it's pretty mellowed out. The length actually comes in a hair long at 29 centimeters for men's size 11. But the width was crazy. It was 9.5 centimeter metatarsal width, toe box width of 10.5 centimeters, and a toe box taper at 29 degrees, pretty, you know, standard for most shoes we're seeing. Honestly, it's because of the mellow inflare and that the width kind of stays a little more true throughout the shoe is one of the reasons why I think they're not so bad. Also, the shoe just breaks in a little bit better. Now, are they the most wide shoe on the market? No. I'd say a narrow and medium foot, I go true to size. A 2E, if you want to try to break them in true to size, it'll take an hour to break them in, but I broke these in at my true size. And they felt pretty good, especially because they're a little bit long. Going up, you know, size is going to be a little bit difficult. I'd say if you're a 2E, want a little bit more room, go up a half size. Like I said, it has a runner's knot. And then if you're a 4E, if you can go up one size, but any more than that, it's going to start feeling kind of like a floppy mess in the forefoot. So just kind of watch out for that. If you're a longer toed 4E, then I think you're absolutely fine going up one size. If you're a really short toed 4E, then that's where you might start getting into some issues with the length if you start going up more than a size on these things. In terms of the snake bitten foot though, for heel pain, I mean, they completely offload the heel, but it's not like you're up like a high heel, right? It's not like you're taking a lot of tension off the Achilles tendon, giving yourself Aquinas, setting yourself up for an Achilles rupture. You're actually flat on the ground. It's just that, all the pressure is being borne underneath of the arch, which actually gives you more arch support in these. So they're also really good for arch pain, arch strain, anything like that, forefoot, ball of foot pain. I know that power cushion slab in the forefoot is actually very thin, but I think it's just, because it's basically a strobel of it. It just really feels really substantial underfoot, and especially because these can accommodate an orthotic, because the runner's not really, it's dealer's choice. The only thing I would say that these aren't the greatest thing out there for would be, like I said, if you're an ankle sprainer or have any, I'd say, lack of confidence in your lateral movement, just because, like I said, the sensation in them is so different that if you're having trouble with your proprioception already, right, you've kind of had issues, with the brain-foot connection, right, the brain ligament connection, that's where I'd say these aren't the best. If you're confident in your movement, right, especially if you're light on your feet and you can kind of pivot on the balls of your feet, then honestly, the pivoting power in these things, because of that shank, really is fantastic. Like I said, it comes more from a confidence standpoint. If you've been like a chronic ankle sprainer and you're already kind of timid, what's the one thing, if you're trying not to sprain, or like, if you've played American football, if you're trying not to get hit, what happens? You get hit or you sprain. So that'd be the only thing on these I'd say to watch out for. Everything else, like I said, super forgiving shoe, and it all just comes down to, like I said, that shank. But as promised, getting into the performance and playability of the Ad Accel, when I took my first hard push off, the one thing that popped into my head was these things are the GP Turbo with more support. They feel ridiculously similar, but with just an all foam setup and a much stronger shank setup. Now, some of that is because, like I said, it offloads the rear foot. So the rear foot feels like super pillowy, super buttery. The forefoot, just that really large piece of power cushion, like I said, even though it is thin, the larger surface area of it, plus that little more buttery foam underfoot, I'm telling you, they feel like the turbos. And because they break in similar to the turbos, they kind of have more that buttery upper feeling once they break in. It takes 30, 45 minutes for that to feel like that. But then you're also getting all the, the support of these. You're getting the higher durability of the uppers in these. I was not expecting to feel that. They played similar too, in that, they're much more for just like super quick bounding movements, right? They really do well with that launch. Serving in these things is an absolute just dream, right? Just up and down, up and down, up and down. Doesn't matter, it feels fantastic. These things, like I said, a serve and volleyer's dream shoe. It feels like you come down off your serve, you're at the service line already on these things. That's what I really liked about them. I did notice though, when I was going to kind of like pivot and turn, things like that, they much more want kind of a light-footedness. That they want you to kind of be hopping and bouncing on your foot. It's not something like I said, the Eclipsean, where you can just kind of just plant your foot and just slide to kingdom come. The shoe is just going to stay perfectly straight on there. A little bit more rugged footwork. These are much more meant for more kind of dancing footwork, kind of like the old turbos were. But I just can't believe like what these felt like underfoot, just how buttery, how pillowy right underfoot they felt, but also, they felt pretty stout, right? Like these things were not just there as a, kind of a floppy, pillowy mess. They definitely had some structure to them too. So honestly, super surprising shoe. Are they for everybody? Of course not, right? But people that kind of liked that kind of feeling of a shoe, right? Kind of like that, springboard type shoe, right? That kind of moon shoe type feeling, like I said, something like the turbos were giving you. Definitely, like I said, in their wheelhouse. They're obviously much different than the Eclipseans. They're definitely much different than the Fusion Revs, but they really have kind of carved out a niche in the market. Super excited to hear what the community thinks of these shoes, because I think number one, it's going to be a dividing line shoe, right? Some people are going to love them. Some people are going to want something more like the Eclipsean. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, just because, like I said, the feeling I got in these things was absolutely insane. It was just so interesting and different. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you do want to see what I'm talking about with the newest Eclipsean line shoe, how much kind of more forgiving they were than previous Eclipseans, and just the playability, the rubber science, you know, I'm sure you've heard it all before. Make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, Trevor, and foam. I'll see you soon in the Sneakerverse.